Sweet. So, hi everyone. I'm going to be talking for the next hour about 2D, the new 2D features. So you saw a little snapshot of it, like Lucas demoed in the talk, and I guess everyone believed his lies when he said it was the best talk ever, which is why everyone's here. Sweet. This talk's going to be about an hour long. I really don't like PowerPoint, so I'm actually going to do most of it in the editor, actually building up a level from scratch. Thank you. Sweet. So before I do a talk, I'd like to find more about the people that I'm speaking to. So put your hand up if you're a programmer, or you write code, copy-paste code from online. OK. Awesome. Put your hand up if you're a 3D artist. Oh, OK. Put your hand up if you're a 2D artist. OK, pretty cool. Put your hand up if you're a UI artist. Cool. There's even sound effects. It's amazing. Put your hand up if you're an audio developer or designer. OK, there's a couple of people. Put your hand up if you work in Q&A. Technically, everyone should put their hand up, so, but OK. Put your hand up if you're a game designer, so it's your job to basically annoy everyone. OK. Put your hand up if you're from Boston. OK. Put your hand up if you're not from Boston. Wow. OK, cool. Lots of Sam Adams being drunk tonight. OK, put your hand up if you're only in this talk because it's right next to the drinks reception, which is happening straight after this. All right, OK, sweet. OK, I can pretty much carry on now. So my name's Andy. I'm going to be doing this talk. And just a bit about me. This is me when my mum said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said Mario, so yeah. I actually showed that photo to someone from Intel, and they said they still program on that keyboard. So by that, you can guess I'm pretty young. So my name's Andy. I'm based in Europe, which is why I sound like Austin Powers. And basically, I cover Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Russia. So just a very small piece of the world, right? And I'm going to be demoing a lot of things. So like I said, I don't like PowerPoint. It's a bit boring. So I like actually hands-on building things in front of people. So I'm going to create a 2D world, an environment, basically using a lot of the new 2D things. So if you went to the keynote, which I'm sure just about everyone else did because they wanted to steal the HoloLens, I mean, see all the other stuff, basically I'm going to be expanding on what Lucas sort of went through very quickly and sort of go a bit more in depth to that. So I'm going to show all the different features. I'm going to show how they all actually fit together, which is really, really important. And I'm also going to show how it actually works with 3D content. So I know this is mostly a 2D talk, but actually how you can combine 2D and 3D content together. Does that sound OK? OK, everyone's a bit quiet, so the drinking hasn't started yet. So disclaimer. So I'm actually going to be showing a lot of features that are still in development. So if things are a bit funky or Unity crashes, not that it ever crashes, right? Yeah, OK, that's funny. Funnily enough, that's a universal joke. Basically, if there's anything in development or basically any things that look a bit funky or sort of like the inspector, these things are going to change or tweak, but the same concepts are still going to apply to the release version. So yeah, cool. I've been asked to put that disclaimer up by the 2D team. So demo time. So what I have here is a very, very simple scene. It's probably the most simple scene you can make in Unity. I'm actually using one of our new mascots that hasn't come out yet. She's called Penny Pixel, which is a bit of a different between sort of the campy Dr. Charles. Penny Pixel, and the dog's called Sprite as well. So it's a super simple 2D controller. It will be released eventually, and she really has got nowhere to go. So yeah. Yeah. There would be tears. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to build environments for her to walk on, basically using all of the new 2D tools. Now, currently, I just have a simple sprite and a simple platform, so we're basically going to add all the rest of the stuff. So, and don't worry, I'll be doing lots of zooming in stuff like that so you can actually see what I'm doing. And I forgot one really, really important thing, increasing the mouse cursor size, which basically no one seems to do when they present. But yeah. So the first thing I want to add is tileable sprites. So I guess we added tiling in the UI system, and it seemed a bit crazy that it would basically just stay there if you want to tile a sprite across, a big border or a big edge. So we basically added that to the 2D tools as well. So if I find my temple blocks, and I find my temple blocks are full, we have our sprite like normal, and position it so. So I'm sure all of you are very used to, like if you stretch it, it looks really, really horrible and very bad. What we actually did is we actually added in different variations of draw modes, to see actually how the sprites get handled. And I guess this works in a similar way to how the UI system works with sprites, where basically you can set if it's filled, if it's tiled, if it's sliced, and all the other options. So under here, I can basically click it and set it to be tiled. Now, what it will do if it's tiled is, let me just turn it off for a second, is now Ah. Well, hey, yeah. There's clapping already from one dude. This guy is like, I'm downloading Unity right now to do this. So we now basically have tiling. So you can take that one sprite, and obviously I've strategically picked a sprite that actually looks pretty good for tiling. So you can actually tile sprites across in a certain, in all sorts of axes. And it works in kind of like a hide and reveal system as well. So if I just set this up to be a big background, and set this to be a background like so, we then have a big tileable sprite, and you can take that one sprite, and she still falls and dies. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a different sprite. So let's add this one here. So this sprite's a bit different. Perhaps we don't want it to tile entirely, but what we want to do is we want to snap it as we resize it. So when the tile reaches a certain size, so for example, the tile here, when it reaches basically the same size as it then snaps. So rather than it kind of hides and reveals, which looks a bit weird, especially if some of the tiles are cut in half, it actually snaps and kind of squeezes. It's really difficult to describe until I actually show it. So we then have the mode as tiled. It's set to be a full tile, and we can actually set the threshold. Let's set it down to 0 and see what happens. So as I increase it, you can actually see it's actually popping in, and it kind of does like kind of a compression, so it's like elastic. So rather than something looking kind of horrible when it's not set to that, so if I set that to be there, you can see that your beautiful, beautiful art that your artists, have basically painted. You can see that it's kind of looking a bit horrible, whereas with full tile, you can actually increase it, and it will basically snap and make it look pretty good. And of course, I'm going to add a box collider, because I'm a bit depressed that she keeps falling. So yeah, you then have your platform, and you can run, and you can still fall off. So super simple. So basically, just add a normal sprite. It just expands it. Awesome. So let's actually get on to cool stuff. So we have also added the support of 9 slicing. So these blocks aren't 9 sliced at all. They're basically just standard sprites that then sort of like resize or scale or tile a bit more. So what we've actually done is in the sprite editor, you can actually now 9 slice sprites and use those as platforms and actually hide and reveal those. So if I find my, which one was it? No, not that one. Where is it? At the top, open it up. Grass tiles, open the sprite editor. So you can see here that we have this, on the sprite sheet, you have a variety of different tiles of different shapes and sizes, which is okay. However, there's more work for the artist to do. So what we decided to do is put in support for 9 slicing a platform. So we've just 9 sliced it like you normally would for the UI. And what it will do is it'll actually take in that same concept of 9 slicing into your tile. So with this one tile, you can make a whole variety of different tiles with this sort of the same size and the same scale and stuff like that. So if I go back here, and I bring in my platform, like so. Let's put it on the other side of here. Yeah, definitely very fitting with the color scheme, right? So we've got that here. So now that we have this here, as I resize it, obviously it's still going to do the horrible stretching, and it does look kind of horrible, and you can see that in the grass at the top. However, if I set it to be tiled again, now as I resize it, you can see it's doing that little pop, and it's actually doing that sort of tiled pop, and I can increase it as well, and it does that pop. So it looks a bit better. But really, when I disable full tile, that's when it looks really good. So you can see it's actually hiding and revealing that column like that. So I can actually just position this here, do this down. You can see it's actually factoring that all in. I can duplicate that platform, make a much smaller, thinner platform, and pull that out a bit, rotate it like so. And then let's take this one, duplicate it again, squash it. So you can actually see that you can actually use the same, from that same sprite, I've already created a variety of sort of different platforms. And of course, so that she doesn't fall through, let's add box colliders to everything. Super nice. So now, she's on the tileable. You can see that using the same sprite, I can have the platforms that are basically, scaled, sized. You don't have to use this for just, hang on, she's going to slide off. So you don't have to use this for just, basically like platforms. You could use this for, let's say, you're making kind of like a Hotline Miami style sort of top-down at an angle game, and you resize rooms, or you want to resize different objects like cabinets or doors or whatever it may be. So you can see, and you can actually see, if I zoom in close, it's actually retained, even though it's sort of slightly different sizes, it's actually retained a lot of what it looks like. And the dog's pretty cute as well. I like his tongue when he jumps. So yeah. And you can actually see here that even with it rotated, she's going to slide, that's okay. You can actually see that when it's rotated, it actually looks pretty good as well. And we've got tall columns. So you can actually use the same sprite, whereas your artist won't be, you might say to your artist, oh, can you now paint me 50 variations of this one platform? And he's like, or he or she is like, no. give me Red Bull, and then I will. Basically, they can create one, and as long as it tiles and looks really nice, you can then throw it in and then do all sorts of crazy stuff. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, okay, some people waking up, the alcohol. The talk's not over yet. Cool. So yeah, pretty standard. So let's actually get on to something a bit more interesting. So the next thing is Smart Sprite. Now, Lucas actually showed this in the keynote, and I'm going to show it a bit more on how you actually set it up from scratch, because he had one that's preset. It's currently called Smart Sprite, but the name may change. So I'm going to call it Smart Sprite for the time being, but the 2D team aren't really sure, and the UX team aren't really sure what it's going to be called exactly. But for right now, it will be Smart Sprite. So if we go to the top and create a new game object, we obviously have tar map. I'll talk quite a bit about that later on. But if I create a new Smart Sprite and go to where the Smart Sprite's located, it looks a bit like this. So what the Smart Sprite does is it starts off with having a fill texture, which is built into Unity, and is a simple square. Now, if I actually move this over, so continue my level, because remember, I'm building like a big environment. That one, and yep, okay. So we've got this here. You can actually grab each of the individual points and then crease them out. And what it's doing is it's basically hiding and reveal the background texture, and you can actually see in this chessboard. So if you really like chess, then basically we've already made you assets for that. But I'm sure you want to make a bit more interesting games than that. So you can see I'm actually sort of resizing these sort of angles. And the really cool thing is you can actually see here, so this may change in the future. A lot of the UI and UX will basically probably change. But you can see here that already as I change it, it's showing what type of angle that sprite's at, which is where when Lucas was resizing one of the sprites and sort of changing it from like an overhang to like a platform you can work on, it was actually popping between it. And I'll show you how to do that. So you can see that as it's changing, you can actually see the angle and sort of how it sort of is working itself out. And of course, you can add other points. So if I double click in between a line, I can then add different points and basically make a level from Ski Safari, I guess, or Alto's Adventure, if anyone's played that. Nope. So yeah, you can see you can kind of make a kind of a procedural shape. So this looks really, really dull, so I'm actually going to sort of like spruce it up a bit. So if we look here, we basically have a standard sprite renderer, so you can actually pass in your own textures and your own materials and shaders and things. Who went to Yilmaz's talk earlier on about shaders? Sweet, you can take what he wrote and then throw it on this. Awesome. You can also set it in within the sorting layer as well to existing sprites or existing UI. And underneath here, we have the Smart Sprite component. So we have here the fill texture. So currently it asks for a texture 2D, but I understand it's probably going to ask for a sprite eventually. So I can actually go into here and find my rocks. Yep, rock, even. And you can see here it looks a bit crazy, and that's because there's a bug. Yeah, okay, it works. So basically your texture, if you want it to tile, it has to be a wrap mode repeat. So now that I've got my object in here, I can then actually resize it, and you can see it's kind of hiding and revealing this sprite, or this texture at the moment. You can actually sort of re-sculpt it and reshape it how you want. Now, sometimes this may be a bit too big or maybe a bit too small, so we actually have as well a fill scale that you can play around with. So if I change my fill scale, you can actually see that I can fill scale forever, or basically zoom in if I want a bit more detail and things like that. So you can play around with that fill scale. So if I add that like so, and I add a tar map collider 2D. So what the tar map collider 2, oh, no, wrong one. Polygon collider, oh, edge collider even. So if I add edge collider 2D, and I have to reset it because that's a bug, don't worry. Or wait, okay, I have to reset a point. Yeah, like I said, it's in development. What we have now is we now have a platform that we can sculpt and we can sort of build. And if I take Penny and I move Penny over here because I'm too lazy to walk through that sort of section again. Oh yeah, okay, well I did it. Yeah, I did a Mario kick jump. So you can see with that we have this platform and she can walk up and down. Now Penny's actually using the built-in platform collider that's already in the engine when you go assets 2D and you import that sort of little robot boy in. So you can see that I already have this here and I can go down here and I can do that. No. Okay, you saw it working though, so that's fine. So currently I have my sprite, and I could be pretty happy if I'm making a game set in a quarry, but instead I actually want something a bit more interesting. So now that we have our sprite, we need to add edges. So edges is really important in actually adding that little piece around the top. So if you went to the keynote, Lucas basically had the grass along the top and kind of some rocks underneath the bottom. You can apply basically the same logic to this. So if I add an angle range, it's going to ask you, so again, this UI is probably going to change. It's going to ask you for different angles. So if I set an angle between 0 and 180 degrees, anything that's a positive angle, so I'll show you in a second when I put it in, is now basically going to have a certain type of sprite. And you can actually see like a diagram here, but that will change probably. Now, I'm going to click the most obscure button in the world, which didn't work. Yeah, OK, there we go. That's probably going to change. And I can basically add in a specific sprite for this type of range. So if I then go to here and I then set grass, you can see here that it's basically added this grass sprite around the top, and it's also tiled it. And this grass is also 9-sliced. So what it will do is it will actually tile the central piece of the sprite, just like with the platforms, but then add that pieces on the end. So now if I take the sprite, I can then resize it. And you can actually see that because it's between 0 and 180, if I add a new point here, as it goes over, it's going to disappear because it's not within that range. And you can see that by basically this green text on a green background. Yeah, ignore that. But basically, you can see that as it pops between it, it's then going to say, oh, it's between 0 and 180, or it's not between 0 and 180. I'm going to pop to something else. So another thing you can do is you can add in multiple ranges. So if I add in a new range, and I set this to be between minus 180 and 0, it's going to be on the opposite underhang. So if I then click the most obscure button in the world, yep, and set this here, I can actually pass in, something like, I think it's called rocks. And then actually now when I take the smart sprite, it's then going to pop between the two different sprites that you can set like that. So you can see here that I have the sprites like so. And you can see it's on the underhang as well. So I can basically sculpt a level that looks kind of like that. That seems a bit too mad, so I've got to give Penny Pixel some, I don't know, like trampoline or jetpack or whatever, using new physics. Awesome. So we've got here this environment like so, and then I can take it. Right, I'm going to sort this out once and for all. There we go, I cheated. So yeah, basically we then have that platform, and then you can walk along it. So there's a couple of things I don't like. So the first thing is that there's straight edges, and sometimes ground and grass and rocks and things like that, they're a bit more organic, and they have curves. And also the fact that maybe I don't want her to walk sort of in the middle of that collider. Maybe I want her to sit on top of the collider, just like Lucas did with the tentacles. So if I go back into the editor, I can actually go to a specific point. So let's say I want to click on, let's spread this out a bit. So say I want to click on this point here, and I want to make this a curved edge rather than a hard angle. So I can select that point, and you can see here that in the editor, it's selected control point 4, and I can set it to be free. And you can see here, it's kind of twisted, but then I go around, and you can actually see that it's then going to, and it also takes into consideration that angle, so you can see it's going snap, and it's working around that snap. So I could create all sorts of really, I can create all sorts of really wacky bits and pieces like this. So yeah, and obviously she can't walk up it, but you can see that you've then got those rocks and, oh, maybe? I failed. So you can see that it's set like that. Now, another thing to show.
Over the top of are the rocks going over the top of the grass? Did you switch that order?
Like that. That was the first time people clapped, wow, cool. Yeah, so you can then swap the layers on sort of whereabouts they are. And when the new sort of like UR, the new inspector comes out, I'm sure you'll be able to do exactly the same thing. Now, one more thing, because I'm running out of time, one more thing I'm going to show with the tile maps is, with the smart sprite, is basically how you can alternate between different types of sprites inside a certain range. For example, my tile is kind of boring. It uses exactly the same sprite for all the grass, and you want to show a bit of variety. However, you don't want to add in like 500 different types of angles, because that would be really sort of like counterproductive. So if I go to my, my grass one, click the most obscure button in the world again, and then go into here, I can then extend the size of this by 4, for example. And I can actually set into each one a different sort of type of grass. So I can set that one in there, that one in there. So you can actually load in a variety of different sprites. And then here we go. So I can go to here, zoom in into this type of sprite, like so. And if I select this point, I can then click N, and then basically it will cycle through those different sprites. You can actually see that you have different varieties. So perhaps I go through and I find the one with the rock. So you can see that rock has basically been 9-sliced, the one that's basically here. So you can actually sort of change through how the different grass goes. And same here, you've got 2 sprites here. I can then select this node, change it to a different type of grass. You can actually see that it's changing within that sort of element. And again, if I run this, I can then run up here. Yep, she is not good to go in here, but you can see that it's a bit different. You know, the grass here is slightly different to the grass here. This one's darker, and you can actually change different variations within the Smart Sprite. So next thing is the collider. So like I said, when Penny Pixel walks on that space, she's basically walking in sort of like that platform. And rather than making a system where you had to take each point and individually move them up piece by piece, what we instead decided to do is build in a collider scale that allows you to scale and set where the collider is. So if I increase the collider scale, that really obscure little green line that you can see, basically I can set what it is. So if I set that all the way down to the bottom, she's then going to be walking basically on the rocks. And you can have the background as, you know, say, going off. I'm sure there's a art style for that sort of thing. And then if I set it all the other way, and it increases up the other side, but not too much, she'll then walk on top of the grass edge. So she's basically going to set like this. So you can actually see that you can either walk on top of the sort of edge or underneath the edge or in the middle of the edge. It's really up to you. So yeah, you can basically do a variety of different things with the Smart Sprite. And like with the fill scale, I can actually increase the fill scale to actually make it look sort of a bit more within the environment. So yeah, you can set different points and do various things. Pretty cool, right? Everyone's so quiet. So let me get on to the cool stuff. So we have the Smart Sprite like so, and you can sculpt and throw in sort of different assets and different sprites and tile them, change out the different edges. But what we also want to do is we also want to perhaps not make something so procedural, but actually use like a tile map system. So if I go into here, I'm actually going to take Penny to, right, I'm cheating here. Let's put it like there. And then I need this is the cool thing about it. I can actually go in and I can just say, oh yeah, I want another platform because this is going to go onto the tile map section level. And hey presto, I already have this here. So if I was to open up Photoshop, if I really wanted to, I'd have to then go da-da-da-da-da, and then my artist then gets really angry because it doesn't look right, and yeah. So, and then you can also see, yeah. So I'm going to continue sort of like the rest of the level. So I'm going to go to Game Object at the top, 2D, and create a tile map. So what you'll notice is as soon as you make a tile map, it will create both a tile map object in your hierarchy, but it also create a tile map that's basically positioned in your world. And if I zoom out, the tile map is pretty much never-ending. So the tile map extends. So you don't have to set a certain size for the tile map. You don't have to say, oh, it's like 50 across and like 10 down. But then you draw in and you say, oh, I need a bit more, and I draw in and need a bit. It basically kind of never ends. I'm sure there is an end point whenever Unity sort of gives up. So if I go into the tile map like so, I set it to 0, 0, and I'll go through a couple of areas on here. So we have, firstly, the grid. So on the grid, it gives us a bunch of very standard options. So we have the paint grid, which basically contributes to the tile map and adds new areas and adds new content. We also have kind of like, it's not a fill, but it's kind of like a defined area. So you can drag a whole square, and it will basically populate that with whatever sprite you have selected. You have the grabber, which will basically, or like the adoption, I guess, or whatever it's called, which will basically allow you to select a zone, and you can then use that zone multiple times. Eraser, it's pretty standard. And then basically a fill as well, so it will get the outside edge and populate that content. And we can also set the cell size. So basically, 1, 1 will just mean each square in here is 1 unit by 1 unit in Unity units. So you can see here that if I have a cube, I go to the tile map, yep. You can see the cube is roughly the same size as each square in the tile map. But you can change that. You can increase it or decrease it however you want. So let's get rid of the cube because you don't want to do any of that yet. And let's go to the tile map and call this platforms. So what we also have is on the tile map, we also have an animation frame rate, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. And we also have material. So again, if you attended Yilmaz's talk, you can take shaders and materials and put that into the tile map. And we also have sorting layers, so we can actually set where this tile map's rendering. So one thing that Lucas didn't show in the demo is basically you can actually have multiple tile maps stacked up in your environment. So I'm going to use one for the background, one for the foreground, one for like some foliage in front, and basically you can actually have a variety of tile maps all layered up. It's pretty cool. So let's go to my platforms, let's go to paint, and let's actually paint something. So you can see here it's already selecting, but if I click, it's not actually going to do anything. And what we have to do is we have to tell it to find a sprite, which is why we have a new window called palette, which is here, well, tile map palette. And this will create a dockable palette, which allows you to either select custom brushes, which you can program yourself, and I'm going to show you sort of like the anatomy of that. I'll talk a bit about that later on. And underneath here, you have a drop-down list that actually finds all the sprite sheets in your asset folder, and you can use all that content. So if I wanted to, let's say, paint Penny Pixel, I then have all the sprites in the world, so I could select one of the sprites and then paint lots of her, right? Pretty standard. Another thing you can do is you can actually select a row. So you can actually select, say, a quadrant, and then go in and then paint sort of like a whole chunk. So you can create your sprite sheets in lots of different ways. Now, this is completely ridiculous for me to use her, so let's find something else. And let's use temple blocks. So, oh, actually, I've already used temple blocks. Let's use demo tiles, maps, new. Yeah, you can tell I was using Photoshop, right? So what we have here is we have a bunch of different squares. And these are already cut in the sprite editor into individual slices. So if I select, let's select that top edge, and then go in here. Let's zoom out a little bit so I have a bit more, I guess, real estate. I hate that saying, sorry. And then add that there. You can then actually take that grid and add it directly onto there. And if I hit, for example, X and Y, I can actually flip it in different directions. So if I wanted to do the same underneath, I can then flip that. I can hit dot to basically rotate it round. So I can set that like that. I know that doesn't look right. I planned all this, don't worry. So I basically can actually use the same sort of like set of sprites and then rotate it and place it. So let's go back to my sprite sheet and find what I need. So let's choose a corner and add that corner. Rotate that around. Super simple. And I need a fill, so let's just fill the middle there. So I could polish this up a bit more, but I'm pretty happy with that so far. Now, one thing that we've done is rather than adding several colliders into the system, what I added earlier on and very quickly took away is basically we have a tile map 2D collider. And what this will do is this will now create a green line or a collider around your tile map if there's any content within it. So as you actually paint new areas, so if I go here and I paint like, hang on, click that, click that, click that, and actually add that, it basically should, I say should, it shouldn't, it didn't, unless I reset it. It will basically then add that collider. So I now have here, you sort of, oh, no one saw that. So basically I now have this block, and then I've got this collider as well up there. So I can then place this content. So now with this platforms, I can actually take this content and then create new. So I can basically select all of this, move over here. Yeah, it kind of scrambles it, ignore that. Actually, that looks pretty cool. Hang on. Okay, let's go back and sample that again. Take like so, let's position that there, position that one there. So you can actually see that it actually overwrites the previous tiles underneath it. And let's actually go to here and erase that, because that's ridiculous. And then if I go into here, now that I've added those sort of points, the tile map collider should, if I reset it, it definitely should. Well, I hope it should. Okay, yep, it definitely did it. So what it will do is it will then wrap that tile map collider around the outside of those tiles, and you can see that I can now run on sort of like this area like so. But the thing I don't really like is the fact that I've taken these tiles, and you can see inside here that it's using exactly the same tile maps going across. This is really, really bad. And it's really bad because it looks like it's kind of just a bit boring. Like whoever's created this environment or whoever the artist is hasn't really added, you know, kind of a bit more detail. So this is where tile map brushes can come into play. So what I can do is I can go into my tile map system, go down to where my demo tile maps, and I could individually pick out each tile that I'm going to replace. Instead, I could script a brush. So what I have here is I have a brush that I've written, and this is a really, really simple brush. It basically, as you paint it, it will actually randomly sort of like scramble and pick a different tile map. So if I zoom out a bit, I can then paint sort of like up here, and you can see it's actually adding the edge, like so. You can see that it's basically going in, and it's actually having a behavior to the tiles rather than adding the same thing, which means that I can go in individually, and I can actually just paint across, and hey, presto, it's actually doing it. Well, hey. So yeah, so you can actually write brushes that actually add, change different behaviors of the tiles. And these are really, really simple to write. So if I go into, and I find my randomizer brush, and using Sublime Text, because it's pretty awesome. The grid brush is basically very, very simple. So you create your randomizer brush, you just inherit grid brush. You can then pass in public variables. You can actually add color, you can add sprite, you can actually add whole entire prefabs and game objects to paint within the tile map system, and I'll show you that in a sec. We also have a method for paints, which passes in the grid you're painting it onto, because you may have multiple grids, and the position you're painting into the grid. And all we have is we basically get the component of the tile map, work out your tile variations here. So in this case, it just picks a random sprite, and then it just sets the tile into that position and random sprites. And that's it. You can write all sorts of crazy brushes and complex systems. And of course, you want to put arrays in so your game designers don't get really annoyed. Or you could take it out and wind them up. You can also add in sort of a sprite preview inside the little brush area. And we also can add it as a scriptable object. So if I want to create multiple randomizer brushes for different types of tiles, I can actually go into assets, create, and actually create many different brushes based on this one sort of bit of code. So if I then go into here, you can see that I have a whole range of different brushes that I can play around with. So if I choose the randomizer one, up here we have the exposed sort of values. So we have what the preview looks like and the random sprites in an array. So you can actually script your own brushes. And what's really going to be exciting is not when we get the tools sort of internally to play around and test, it's when you all get the tools in the community. Then all the different brushes that people can make really sort of like expands it. And it's really, really exciting for both me and everyone at Unity when we release tools and we just see all the mad, crazy, wild, incredible, weird, daft, depends how you assess things, things sort of like made by the Unity community. So if I go into the platforms and I then walk along here, you can actually see that now the tiles are now randomized a bit. And I can go in and sort of overwrite them as well. So I can actually, yeah. So, I'm just out of reach. If only she had a slightly higher jump, and I could tweak that in the inspector. Oh, I can, yeah. So now that I have the platforms positioned like so, what I can also do is use other brushes to actually control other different areas. So I have this brush, and this brush basically operates on kind of an algorithm by a guy called, I think, John Wong. And basically that's that you can pass in sort of 15 different tiles, and you can actually create up, basically, and paint. So this is the same brush that Lucas was using in the keynote to basically add sort of like, an edge. So you can see that I've just painted sort of like this variety of rooms. Now I think that's a bit dark, so using that same brush, which I'm sure we'll sort of release in a demo pack, I can then actually use a different type of brush, which actually loads in a bunch of islands. So without having to change code and just changing the content, so artists can change what they create, you can then basically sort of paint sort of environments. You can actually see that the Tile Map Collider is eventually updating, maybe. Yep, it sort of is. So you can see that basically using exactly the same script for that bottom brush and exactly the same script for the top brush, you can actually load in different content and assets and actually have a bit of variety and script them as well. So you can see, well, hey, I've just created an island. How awesome is that? Da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's quite varied. So yeah, just in, I guess, like 40 minutes, I've already made all that. Awesome. So what I'm going to do next is sort of contribute to my environment. So I've currently got my platforms, which I can walk on, which is OK. I'm going to add a couple more because I need a bit more space or real estate or whatever you call it. And so I can actually add in that, select that whole area, and basically create that whole collider. So I actually have a bit more space for me to run as well. So this is all OK, but what I want to do is actually want to add some more detail, because currently this is all, I guess it's all in 2D, but it's all only on sort of one layer. So I can create a brand new tile map, reset it to be 0, because Unity never does. No one laughed, OK. And then what I can then do is I can then go to my paintbrush and actually add, I can set this tile map to be on a foreground layer, so it's basically the character's going to run behind it. And then if I increase my window and go down and find my demo tile maps new, I can actually select sort of like, some bushes, place them here, place them here. So I'm selecting basically whole chunks. So I can put, for example, that bit there. I can put a little Unity logo sign just for subliminal messaging. She's on the quest to find nested prefabs. I should have bet someone that would get laughs. So yeah, and you can actually see that I'm actually adding all sorts of different sort of like foliage and content into my game. So now if I run through it, because this tile map, this entire tile map's on sort of like the front way, she can say, oh look, I'm behind the plants, how cool. Oh look, nested prefabs is this way. Oh look, here's some plants. So you can actually see that you can add other areas and other sort of like tiles and elements into your environment, and instantly they'll be on a different sort of layer. That's cool, but let's go sort of a bit more crazy. So we want to animate things. Currently, everything's been very static. So what you can also do, in what I've pointed out beforehand, is underneath the tile map component here, we actually have an animation frame rate. So some of you are probably thinking, oh, I love Mechanim so much. Why aren't you not putting a character controller on every single individual tile that has a state? And basically, that's super, super expensive. Some of you are thinking, I don't like Mechanim, so you're very happy. So what we can do here is we can add a tile map, another one, just to show that you have lots of different layers. We can add this to be into the foreground, and what we can also do is we can also paint our tiles with a different color. So you don't have to just set everything to be the same color. I can paint a tile, for example, to be of much, it's got a bit of transparency. And then, as well as putting it in the foreground, I can order it, for example, 10, so it's forward in front of everything. And again, I'm going to go back to my brush. So what I have here is I have a waterfall brush. And with that waterfall brush, in the grid brush, I basically load in a set of sprites. And then I can set basically how quickly those sprites update. So I'm basically animating things in a sprite-based manner, like a frame by frame. However, rather than doing it in the animation controller, it's actually a lot more optimized. It's actually doing it in the tile map. So if I go here, and let's do, nope, don't do that. If I go here, and I paint a tile map of waterfall, and it did not do it. Why not? Oh, because I need to select the brush. You can see here that I'm actually painting a waterfall like so, and I can paint it going off onto the top. And I also have exactly the same code, so exactly the same animation brush. I can actually like write in something like that. So what should happen is as I go over, this is the most boring waterfall of all time. It doesn't really change. And that means, I'm sure many of you will probably do that, like I've just done then. So that means what you have to do is you actually have to set what the animation frame rate is going to be. So in this case, it's going to be 30 frames a second for the entire game. Or if you want to go AAA, you have to set it 60. I can't believe people actually laughed at that. It was amazing. So if I actually set down the alpha a little bit, you can actually see that as I run in, you can actually see that I have the waterfall, and you can see that it's transparent and animating. I know it's currently hitting some rock somewhere, and it's not, I guess, real, but you can actually see that, oh, cool, nested prefabs, and then here we have a big animating waterfall looping through. And this is much more optimized than every single one of those tiles having, say, animated controller and a whole state machine. And just like that, I can also contribute other sort of elements. So I made, using exactly the same randomizer brush, I'm basically just writing sort of, I'm just adding a couple of more elements. So you can see that I've just drawn that in there. And then I've got, basically I can contribute to that tile, and then I should probably lower that. You can see that it's also taking the alpha in of sort of the environment, so it looks a bit better as well. Pretty cool, right? Okay, let's show you the cool stuff now. So we have the waterfall, which is like this, which is animating like this. However, what we can also do is we can go one step further. So I can also go to my, let's set a background tile map, because that's a bit more interesting. So let's create another tile map, and let's call this piping. And let's go in and set piping to be in the background. And one thing that Lucas did show is you can also write tile maps that, for example, as you paint to a tile, update the nearby cells. So, for example, if I was to go into my sort of piping sprite sheet right at the bottom, and you can see here we've got all the different sort of chunks, it would take a long time to actually go draw up, I need to get this one, rotate it round. Instead, you can actually script a really, really simple brush, which allows you to draw that. So you can see here that as I zoom in and draw into this tile map, you can actually see it's going in and it's updating the nearby tiles. So you can actually create really complex things. And because it's in the background, it means I can actually draw, some pretty crazy stuff. So, and then, yep, position like so. So there's kind of scaffolding holding together the lost temple of listed prefabs, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that quite a lot, but that's okay. And then you can see here that she's then running sort of like in the background, and you can see that there's multiple levels. So we have, for example, the plants and the waterfall in front of her, and then we have sort of the background piping. And just like in 3 seconds, I already have, you know, a fairly complex kind of sprite system, sort of like for the sort of background. And again, if I add the TileMap 2D collider to that piping layer, it will then also cut out around the outside edge. Cool. So we have a bit more detail. So let's add a couple more bits and pieces. So let's create another tile map, and let's call this tile map torches. So some of you are probably thinking that the tile map system is basically confined to in between one of these squares, which isn't entirely true. You can actually use sprites that aren't squares and actually leak them outside the tile map. Because when you talk about tile maps, some people, they assume it's like, oh, it's basically like grid-based sort of chess, like top-down Minecraft or something. You can actually use the tile maps for a lot more things. So currently I've used content that stays within inside a tile map square. Instead, you can actually use content that sort of is about outside. So again, I have a torch brush, which basically will place flaming torches because every temple needs a flaming torch. And then I can actually add in, and you can actually see that this sprite is outside the edge. So I can actually overlay, you know, a variety of tile maps. So let's put a couple here. Let's put a couple here, basically saying go in. And let's put a few here, and like so. And let's set the frame rate to be 30, because these torches, again, cycle through a bunch of sprites. So one thing that you'll notice is that each of the tiles actually cycles through the sprites at a completely different frame rate. And that's because I use exactly the same script that the waterfall cycles through, but the waterfall cycles through at a speed of 1, whereas actually the torch brush, so if I zoom into the fire torch brush, you can see that you can actually pass in minimum speed and maximum speed and actually work out some extra code to actually randomize how the content of the tiles work. And if I go into the animation brush script, really simple, you set the tile, you set the animation, and you set the speed. It's really easy. So using exactly the same code for the waterfall, I've actually managed to apply it to the brushes as well. So like I was saying earlier on, when people can go in and script tile map brushes, it's going to be incredible, just some of the stuff that people make. I currently have 8 minutes left, and I've probably got about an hour of content left, so I'm going to sort of hurry up a bit. So I have let's make another tile map. So currently everything I've done is in purely 2D. You can actually use the tile map brush system for 3D as well, so you can actually use it for prefabs, or just placing sort of any 3D object. So I've created another tile map, and this tile map is going to be called coin pickups. So every temple or every sort of platformer needs a coin pickup. I can go here and select this little coin pickup. And what I can actually do is I can actually paint sort of a trail of coins. So think how long this would take your level design to place through the temple. Yeah, look at that. It's already done that. And let's say I really, really like how sort of these coins look. I can actually select that section. And it's not going to do it, isn't it? Please work. No. Ah, come on. Select that section and not do it. Okay, what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to select all the coins in that grid and then paste them, but that should eventually work. And then you can see that if I go into the 2D space, we've got a tile map all like so. I could even do something a bit trippy and actually rotate the tile map like that. So actually the tile map can be rotated in all sorts of different axes, and I have a 3D demo next. And we have all the tile map sort of coins positioned like so. So we can see, and we have all the 3D coins. If I pick them up, that's actually 3D particles, which now support 2D collision, because it's taken a little while, right? So on the particles, when you go into the collision system to define how it collides with an object, you can actually choose between 3D and 2D. It's that simple. So you can see that I have collected some extra coins. This is actually the messiest temple I've ever seen. It looks like basically all of my levels in Minecraft. And you can see here, and okay, no one saw that. And then I can jump and then hit all those, and it bounces off. So, I mean, just in half an hour, I've just painted all of that and created that whole environment. So I've got 6 minutes left, so I'm going to save that. Also, when you place the 3D coins, or place the objects, you can actually tell it to, in this script, it basically just childs the prefabs into the tile map. And it also works with the eraser. Well, I say it works. Let's hope it does. Yeah, so you can actually erase out sort of different areas of the coins. And better yet, I can also do this. So I can go over here and say I found basically the end point. I can then select a grid and select a grid of coins. And let's add in on the platform layer. Let's paint yourself in a box. And I'm going to reset the collider because I know that it didn't do that. OK. So now, just like that, I've just created a big coin. Yep, I've got to do the wall jump. Over here, run behind the waterfall, walk past the varying torches, jump in. Well, hey, cool, yeah. So, and you can see all the 3D particles colliding with this sort of 2D wall, and I can... She's very versatile. I don't think the dog's doing much with it. Cool. So yeah, just like that, I've just created all that, and all sorts of different behaviors. So one thing I'm going to show you next is something a little bit different. So that's kind of, actually, let's show you tentacle sprites. So what we have here is we can create another smart sprite. And let's say I think everything's a little too uniform in my environment. So if I actually take this smart sprite over, like so, and let's say at the end I would like a vine. What you can actually do is you can use, and Lucas did demonstrate this, is you can actually use the smart sprite system for actually creating a spline-based path. So I can go into here, I can click angle ranges and increase that. And I can set angle ranges between minus 180 and plus 180. Click this weird little button and add a sprite. And what we can then do is we can add, for example, let's go leaves. And you can see here that we then have a kind of like a vine. However, this vine is obviously connected entirely in sort of a circle, and a square. And I don't think my game is this abstract. So what I can actually do is I can actually remove build bottom, and basically it won't build sort of like the bottom piece, so I can actually place these individually. I can remove continuous strip, and it actually removes the middle part. And this is kind of like what Lucas showed in the demo, where you basically can create a tentacle, or in this case, a vine, because it's a bit more fitting to what I'm trying to show. And we can have a vine like such, if I select that point. It's obviously a bit too rigid, so I can actually go in and then tweak and sort of set this to be free, and sort of create a vine like so, create another vine like so, and then like that, I've already got a tileable vine and my environment. So yeah, when I get to it. So yeah, you can actually mix and match these sort of different areas within your game and actually sort of combine smart sprite and tile maps. And just like so, I've created this entire sort of 2D world, even with a floating island above her. It's like got some Mario level game design here. So one thing, I'm drastically running out of time, and I'm sure the beer is flowing soon, is you can also use this tile map not only in sort of like the flat axis, you can actually rotate it into a different sort of way. So what I've got here is I've got some grass. This grass actually uses the new tiled system. So you can I'm actually tiling and extending the grass. So I can take that sprite and sort of resize it. I know it's solid green. I didn't have time to find a better sprite. So if I go in here and create a 2D tile map, like so, and rotate it 90 by 90 degrees, we now have the tile map flat onto the top of the grass. I'm going to call this tile map forest and roads, because I'm not that imaginative. Now, I can use the same piping brush, which actually passes in all the different pipes. And you can see here that I can then sort of create a forest road looking top down. And I am aware that this is probably, the type of road that you'll find in Willy Wonka land, but that's fine. So whoever designed this road is on a lot of Sam Adams. But you can see that just like so, I've just created a top-down environment. So let's go one step further. So what I've also done is I've created a couple of 3D forest brushes. And it's basically very, very similar to how I've kind of combined how the randomizer brush works, where it picks a random object from an array, pretty easy and standard to do, and then passed in instead prefabs. And then what I can do is I can actually add, if I turn these options off, if I go to forest and roads, select that, this last one here will instead now actually place forests and things. Let me show you the cool stuff now, right? So now that I've added these trees, I don't really like it that much because each tree looks like a lollipop to begin with. And, well, not every tree, these are fir trees. And also each tree basically is at the same uniform and the same sort of style. So what instead I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these and get rid of them because they're pretty bad trees. You applauded bad trees, like, come on. And then what I've also done here is you can randomize the scale, so it just simply just gets the scale and applies it to each tree. Randomize the rotation. And I've also written a really simple script. It's a really simple line of code, which basically will take the tile, and rather than each tree is very uniform and boring, it actually puts it and randomizes it inside each of the tiles itself. So now, when I paint it, I can then basically apply that logic, and then basically my trees will now be in slightly different sort of like sizes. Okay, one just grew on the road, but ignore that. It's a City Skylines mod. Now, imagine if you had to place all those individually if you didn't have this. And then, yeah, like I said. Can I draw the Unity logo? That's the worst graffiti of the Unity logo ever, but oh well. Okay, right. A few more cool. Yeah, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty big forest. So now, and I can do something. Let's do something really, really weird. Let's also now rotate it and stuff, and basically all the objects will rotate it too. So you can do some cool stuff. So what I can also do is I can take that same sort of vegetation script, and like I've said, was when you add it as a script to objects, you can go to Assets, Create, and you can see here that I basically have my terrain brush, vegetation brush, the animation brush, and actually create new brushes from that same script, just like you can currently do with scripting Unity or scripting with shaders. And basically, I can take that, and I've also made another one which places like foliage on the floor, so I've got like some planks and stuff. Yeah, that was in a weird position. I don't know why. And then basically I can paint some foliage, and it's basically taking exactly the same script, and I'm now just designing a weird forest. These roads are suspiciously small. The tree trunks are big. It's like Mario Kart level or something. And just as kind of like a icing on the cake, I've also made another brush which just single object places. This brush has exactly the same script as the one with the coins where you place it on the tile map, and what this will do is it will just place campfires. So yeah, you can actually use it for 3D placement of objects. And then when I run my game, I say game very loosely. You can actually see that it's got like the prefabs. You can use it for designing environments. You can use it for placing objects. And look, I've just painted a Unity logo using trees in a forest. No one thought they were seeing that when they came to Unite. And yeah, basically just created this whole environment using sort of like this system. And then just like I can do that with that, I can select, for example, that chunk. Oop. And then place chunks of trees. And I can also go to the, basically kind of, not the fill, but kind of like the big grid square. And I can select that, and let's just, oh God, this is. And I now have a burning forest. Nope, yes. Hey, it works. About 3 frames a second, but so this is a bit more interesting PowerPoint now, right? But you can see I've just painted a bunch of, you could paint orcs, you could paint goblins, you could write brushes that rather than individual object placement, place kind of like a grid or kind of a chunk. So yeah, you can do, whoa, that chug. That's not going to be running on an iPhone 2. Oh boy. So pre-alpha software has not got, you know, it's basically user error that this is doing this. Like, the tools are all fine, it's just me going a bit overboard. Yeah, I've overran. So that's basically the end of like the demo and the presentation. It's kind of in an hour. I've created that. Oh, yeah. OK. Good old trusty PowerPoint. So basically, that sort of environment and piecing all those things together, I've just created sort of a bunch of locations and things like that. So basically, you can use not only, it started off 2D and it kind of went into 3D. And like I was saying earlier on, it's really exciting when people get these tile map brushes and they can write them for their artists, they can write them for game designers, put them on the asset store, and people are going to make some really incredible different bits and pieces. So what now, right? You can actually download everything I just did now. You can download. You can download that build. It's basically on our Bitbucket. That's a ridiculous URL. So let's go in. Sorry. Wait. No, don't do that. You could just type Bitbucket Unity. Our SEO is pretty good. Hopefully, people are taking photos, not just doing selfies. That would be a bit weird. Although someone should take a selfie with the URL. So basically, on our Bitbucket, we have a bunch of different examples and demos, and we actually have the build. It's Alpha 4 build. You can download it and play around with it. And another thing that our it actually worked. It deleted it. Awesome. Is at the top, they actually have a thanks for. OK, that's really, really sort of. Hang on. No, you could probably read that. So it says, thanks for feedback. Didn't complete it. Click here. So clicking that, hopefully conference Wi-Fi is good. It takes you to a survey. So if you use these features and use the time app, please give us feedback. Please let us know what you make, what you don't make, what you like, what you don't like. These are things still in development. So kind of some of the UI, like, for example, the radial ring will probably change and things like that. So yeah, give us feedback. Play with them. Try them out. Mess around with them. Just basically let us know how you're using these tools, because we want people to let us know, can you make big worlds? Can you create 2D environments with this? And just as another sort of point, so you can play around with them. So the conference Wi-Fi is about to get hammered during the drinks reception. If everyone put your hand up if you're going to the party. The party. Yeah, OK. He's already at the party. So basically, if you're going to the party, I've been asked to remind you to take your name badge, please, and please take your ID as well. If you're like me and look about 12 years old, I've definitely got to take my ID wherever I go. But make sure tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the auditorium, so that's the big keynote room, the UX team are actually giving a talk on how they actually design the user experience of Unity and how they go through those features. And using 2D, it's not entirely going to be about 2D, but they're actually going to use 2D as an example. So you can kind of see how we got nested talks here. Like Lucas is talking to this one into the UX talk. There you go. So yeah, go talk to the UX team, sort of see how they design Unity and how they create it. They talk about the smart sprite and sort of the design of that. And that is basically it. I've overshot. Hopefully the beer hasn't run out, and I hope everyone has a great night.